Is blindness a barrier? No.
Is deafness a barrier? No.
Are mobility, learning, cognitive disabilities, speech impairments and others, or even a combination of them, barriers? No way. Lack of accessibility is.
Welcome to Web Accessibility for All.
Follow the blind. This journey starts now.
It's 2 in the morning. David, a product manager, is sleeping. No meetings, no Slack messages, no Jira tickets, just silence. Then his phone rings. A voice says,
"The accessibility audit is back."
Another voice immediately jumps in, a developer.
How am I supposed to estimate these bugs?
Then QA.
Half of these tickets don't tell me how to validate the fixes.
Then design.
If we change this interaction, we're going to affect multiple screens.
Then leadership.
David, how long is remediation going to take?
Nobody answers. The voices keep coming. Bugs, deadlines, pressure, all talking over each other. The noise gets louder and louder, until suddenly, he wakes up, heart racing, looks around the room. No voices, no audit, no remediation plan, just a bad dream. Then the phone rings, again.
Sorry to call so late, David, but the accessibility audit is back.
This time, it isn't a dream.
Welcome to this two-part series about accessibility remediation plans. In this first episode, we are gonna talk about what a remediation plan actually is, who owns it, how to define scope, how to prioritize findings, and why estimating accessibility work is much harder than most teams expect. Because long before a team starts fixing accessibility bugs, they need something more important, a plan. Ariel here, and welcome back to Web Accessibility for All.
What is an accessibility remediation plan?
Let's start with something that I see all the time. A team receives an accessibility audit. The report contains findings, WCAG references, screenshots, recommendations. And somebody says,
Great! Now we know what we need to fix.
not necessarily, because an audit and a remediation plan are two very different things.
An audit is not a plan.
Think of an audit as a snapshot. It catches accessibility barriers at a specific moment in time, showing you what broke, where and why is an issue. But
Where do we even start fixing? What can take a back seat for now? How heavy is the lift? Who needs to jump in? How do we actually check our work?
Why teams struggle after an audit?
the second an audit lands, a wave of new questions hits every department. Engineering demands effort estimates. QA needs clear validation criteria. Design wants to gauge user impact. Product pushes for concrete timelines. Leadership just wants to see progress. Suddenly, the conversation flips. It's no longer a set of technical accessibility issues. It's a planning bottleneck.
What makes a good remediation plan?
A remediation plan creates alignment. It defines scope, priorities, success criteria, and ownership. None of those are code problems. They are product decisions.
The ownership trap.
Once you realize you need a plan, the next question is obvious. Who owns it? The accessibility specialist? Nope. The engineers, maybe? Neither. Everybody? No, that's exactly the same than no one. Well, product leaders, welcome to the ring. Because you are the ones who establish the road to follow. Because you hold the ultimate superpower, prioritization. Product decides what gets fast-tracked versus what gets deferred. Exactly how much sprint capacity is sacrificed. How compliance feeds into the broader roadmap.
The reality is much messy.
I've seen meetings where a product manager wants to fix a specific issue immediately. For example, engineering says a component needs redesign. Product says the roadmap is full. Leadership asks if the issue is legally required. And 15 minutes later, nobody is talking about the user anymore. That's why remediation planning often becomes difficult. Not because the findings are complicated, but because people have very different levels of confidence about what should happen next.
The best remediation plans are collaborative.
Absolutely. Design helps define interactions. Engineering helps define effort. QA helps define validation. Accessibility specialist, if any, provides guidance and review when needed. Different responsibilities, shared accountability.
Defining scope before fixing anything.
Once ownership is clear, the next mistake appears almost immediately.
What should we fix first?
But before prioritization comes something even more important: scope. Without scope, every new finding gets added to the current effort, and eventually nobody knows what's included, what's deferred, what's still being remediated, what's finished.
Scope comes before prioritization.
Before you touch a single ticket, you need to ask,
what exactly are we trying to remediate?
are you fixing specific critical user journeys? Or are you hunting down specific component patterns? Different scope, different plan, completely different priorities.
Findings are not bugs.
Picture this. An audit lands with 40 distinct findings. The engineering manager panics. Bulk creates 40 Jira tickets. And the team braces for weeks of heavy lifting across 20 different forms. Missing labels on page A, broken error messages on page B, and bad announcements on page C. But what if I tell you those 40 tickets are actually just one? What if every single one of those pages imports the exact same component? Not every finding is an actual problem. Look for patterns, and maybe you will find the root of many ones.
Common ways to define scope.
There isn't one correct approach. In fact, different organizations use different boundaries.
By user journey.
Useful when users are blocked from critical tasks.
By component family.
Useful when findings repeat throughout the product.
By time frame.
Useful when capacity is limited.
Why accessibility remediation is different from normal bug fixing.
At first glance, accessibility findings look like any other bug. But accessibility remediation introduces challenges that normal bug fixing rarely does.
Accessibility requires a stronger definition of done.
When do you think a bug can be considered finished? When the code is merged? When QA passes? When the ticket closes? Accessibility remediation usually requires more: keyboard testing, screen reader testing, regression testing, validation against the original finding. And you know what? Accessibility tickets often remain open longer than teams expect because they are harder to prove.
Prioritization. What gets fixed first?
Prioritization is usually a combination of user impact, technical dependencies, business constraints, and available capacity. Let's consider some options to guide us through the process.
Start with user blockers.
The first candidates are inaccessible authentication, keyboard traps, inaccessible checkout flows, inaccessible enrollment processes.
Then look for shared failures.
Fixing one of these may eliminate multiple findings at once, but they often require more time and teamwork.
Prioritization is rarely perfect.
When implementation starts, things can change, for better or worse. New information appears, dependencies emerge, estimates change. So, prioritization is not a one-time decision. It's an ongoing adjustment process. Of course, once priorities exist, leadership asks the question every accessibility specialist eventually hears.
Great, how long is this going to take?
One thing I learned over the years is that accessibility findings don't scale linearly. 20 findings are not necessarily twice the effort of 10 findings. Sometimes 20 findings disappear after fixing one component. Other times, one finding uncovers a complete redesign. That's why counting findings is one of the worst ways to estimate remediation effort.
Estimating time without lying to yourself.
I'm going to say something that might sound controversial. Accessibility estimates will almost always be wrong. Accessibility remediation is often a discovery process, and this is a fact.
The estimation trap.
Let's go back to the audit that our team received. The problem is that the team is often being asked to estimate before they understand root causes, dependencies, implementation options, validation efforts, potential regressions.
Estimate together before estimating individually.
One of the most useful exercises I've seen is reviewing findings as a group before assigning work. That allows teams to build a shared understanding because different people notice different risks. I believe that discussion often improves estimates more than any estimation technique. Another mistake is estimating only the fix. Many accessibility findings require investigation before implementation even begins.
Confidence is more honest than precision.
Sometimes teams spend hours arguing whether the finding is 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. And here is the uncomfortable truth. The goal of estimation is not predicting the future. The goal is creating enough understanding to make good planning decisions.
Wrapping up.
Most accessibility remediation plans don't fail because developers couldn't fix the issue. The irony is that most remediation failures have nothing to do with accessibility. The hard part is getting everyone moving in the same direction. That's what a remediation plan really does. It turns a pile of findings into a shared commitment. Thanks for listening to Web Accessibility for All. In the next episode, we'll move from planning to execution. Until then, remember, an audit identifies barriers. A remediation plan creates a path forward. Goodbye.
Thanks for joining us today. Subscribe for a new challenge next week. And don't be shy. Leave us a review or ask your accessibility questions online. See you next week for another episode of Web Accessibility for All.